Your mother did not rent that building. She owned 30% of it. I've loved you since about the second week, and I said nothing.
The lawyer read the document for 11 minutes without saying a single word, and by the end of it, Amanda Johnson was gripping the edge of the desk so hard her fingers had gone numb. "Say something," she said. "Please, anything." Kim Do-yeon set the pages down, took off his glasses, and looked at the two people sitting across from him at 9 in the morning in a small law office in Mapo-gu with the expression of a man who had just been handed something he had not expected to see in his career. "Your mother," he said slowly to Junho Kang, "did not rent that building." "That's what she said." Junho's voice was hoarse. He had not slept. Neither of them had. "Amanda found it at 4 this morning. I've read it 9 times and I still don't understand what I'm reading." "Then let me explain it very clearly." Do-yeon tapped the top page. "In 2014, the owner of that building was in serious debt. He needed money quickly. Your mother gave him money, and she was not stupid, so she did not give it to him as a loan or as prepaid rent." He looked up. "She took a registered ownership share, 30% of the building, filed with the property registry, stamped, witnessed, and legally binding for as long as that building stands." The room went completely silent. 30%? Junho repeated. 30%, Do-yeon said, "which means the current owner has spent the last 4 weeks attempting to sell a property that he does not entirely own, and it means no sale of that building can legally complete without the written consent of the other registered shareholder." He paused. "Which, since your mother's death, is you." Junho did not move. He did not speak. He sat in a plastic chair in a lawyer's office and stared at a piece of paper his mother had signed 11 years ago and told nobody about. And Amanda burst into tears. Not delicately, she put both hands flat on the lawyer's desk and sobbed in a stranger's office in front of 2 men who had no idea what to do about it, for 11 years of a woman she had never met, who had sat down in front of a desperate landlord in 2014 and been smart enough to ask for paper. "She knew," Amanda managed. "Junho, she knew this day was coming. She could not have known when, but she sat in a room with that man and she thought, one day somebody is going to take this from my son." Junho did not answer. He was looking at the signature at the bottom of the page, his mother's handwriting, the same handwriting that had been on the price cards in the display case for 11 years, on a legal document filed with the Seoul Property Registry when he was 18 years old and had been told nothing. "She never said a word," he said. "Would you have let her?" Do-yeon asked mildly. "In my experience, this generation of women did not tell their sons about money. They told them everything was fine." Junho laughed. It came out wrong, closer to a sob. "Yes," he said, "that sounds like her." If you have been waiting 9 days for this exact moment, comment the word 30 right now, because I want to see that number 1,000 times in the comments. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it immediately, because this is the finale, and I promise you it is nowhere near over. They had 4 days. That was the first thing Do-yeon told them once Amanda had stopped crying and Junho had come back into himself enough to ask a question. "The sale is scheduled to complete on the 30th. Your share blocks it. But blocking a sale is not the same as saving your cafe." Do-yeon laid it out with the flat precision of a man who had watched hope kill people before. "You have 2 problems. The first is that I need the original registry certificate to file the objection, not a scan, not a copy from a shoebox, the certified original from the property registry office, which takes 10 to 14 working days by normal application. "We have 4 days," Amanda said. "You have 4 days. And the second problem?" Do-yeon looked at Junho. "The second problem is that once you block the sale, you own 30% of a building with a hostile majority owner who will now hate you. He can force a partition sale. He can make your life extremely difficult. The only clean ending is if you buy his 70% outright. And for that, you need money." "We have money," Junho said. "The crowd fund." "How much?" Junho told him. Do-yeon was quiet for a moment. Then he almost smiled. "That is in fact enough. With the 30% you already hold, that number buys the rest of the building at fair market value." He put his glasses back on. "So, you do not need money, Mr. Kang. You need a piece of paper from a government office in 4 days that normally takes 14. That is your entire problem." They tried everything. Amanda spent that first day on the phone in the back room of Haru Cafe, and by the end of it, she had learned exactly one thing, and that was that the Seoul Property Registry Office did not care even slightly that 400,000 people on the internet were watching. There was no expedited process. There was no exception. There was a queue, and there was a form, and there was a woman on the phone who was perfectly polite and completely immovable. Junho went in person on day 2 and stood in line for 5 hours and came back with nothing. On day 3, Mrs. O arrived at 8 in the morning with 3 other elderly women from the neighborhood, all of whom she had apparently recruited overnight, and announced that between them they knew a retired clerk, a retired clerk's son, and a woman whose nephew worked in a district office, and that they intended to make phone calls until something happened. Nothing happened. "I have exhausted my entire network," Mrs. O announced, deeply offended. 9 years I have been buying coffee in this room. This is the first time it has not worked." On the afternoon of day 3, Amanda tried the one thing left, which was going over the counter's head. She called the district office and asked for a supervisor. She explained the situation in careful, rehearsed Korean that Junho had written out for her phonetically on the back of a receipt. And when that ran out, she switched to English and explained it again, and the supervisor listened to all of it with genuine patience and then said the thing Amanda had been dreading. "May I ask why you did not apply for this in February?" "Because we didn't know it existed in February." "I understand, but the office cannot create an exception because the applicant did not know. If we did that for one, we would have to do it for everyone, and then the queue would not mean anything." A pause, and then, more gently, "I am sorry. I hope you find another way." Amanda put the phone down and sat with her head in her hands. "That's it," she said. "That was the last number I had." Junho was standing in the doorway of the back room with a tray he had forgotten he was holding. "Then it was never going to work," he said. "Don't." "Junho, I am not being defeatist, I am being accurate." He set the tray down. 4 weeks ago, we needed money and no money existed. 211,000 people fixed that in 14 hours. Now we need a piece of paper and there is no version of the internet that can walk into a government office and take it out of a filing system. Sometimes there is not a clever answer. Sometimes there is just a queue. "There is always an answer." "There isn't," Junho said. "My mother believed that. She believed it right up until the last 8 months, and then she stopped believing it and did not tell anybody. And that is the part I have never been able to forgive." Amanda looked at him. "Okay, then we lose it properly. We fight until 5 o'clock on the 30th, and then we lose it, and you can say you did everything, and I will be standing next to you when you do." Junho looked at her for a long moment. "You have a flight in 6 days," he said. "I'm aware of the flight." You keep not mentioning the flight. So do you, Amanda said. Neither of them said anything else about it. And through all of it, the other thing kept getting worse. Because the post accusing Amanda of running a scam had not gone away, it had metastasized. 2 more videos went up dissecting her, both from creators with more subscribers than she had, both framed as concerned questions rather than accusations, which was worse. The refund requests climbed past 600. Her 2 brand deals had gone from paused to quietly canceled. Someone had found her mother's school in Houston and posted the name of it. Junho found her at 11 at night on day 3, sitting on the storage room floor with her back against the couch, phone face down beside her, staring at nothing. He sat down next to her without a word. I'm going to lose my channel, Amanda said. You don't know that. I do, actually. I've watched it happen to other people. She laughed, wetly. Do you know what the funny part is? I could fix it, right now. I have every receipt, every message, the whole timeline. I could put together a video that ends this in about 6 hours. Then why haven't you? Because it would end you. Amanda turned to look at him. To prove I didn't fake a crisis, I have to prove there was a crisis, which means posting your mother's debt, her medical bills, the 8 months she hid being sick, the numbers she died owing. Her voice cracked. It means putting the worst private thing that ever happened to your family on the internet so that strangers stop calling me a thief, and I would rather lose the channel. Junho did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, Post it. Junho, post it. He was looking straight ahead at the wall. She hid it for 8 months and it killed her. I have kept hiding it for 3 years and it has nearly killed the cafe. I am so tired, Amanda. I am so tired of protecting a secret that has only ever hurt us. He turned to her. She was not ashamed of being poor. She was afraid I would be ashamed of her. So let's stop. Post all of it. Amanda posted it at 6 the next morning. It was 22 minutes long. It had every redocument, every date, every screenshot, the crowdfund ledger in full, and it did not attack a single person by name. It laid out an 11-year-old Cathay, a woman who worked through 8 months of illness, a debt, a redevelopment project, and a timeline that anyone could check. At the end, she said one thing that was not a fact. I got stranded here with $11, and a stranger let me in out of the rain. Everything after that, I chose. If that makes me stupid, fine. It doesn't make me a thief. By 9 in the morning, it had 2 million views. The comments turned within an hour, and they turned the way the internet always turns, which is to say, completely and without any acknowledgement that it had ever been facing the other direction. People who had spent 9 days calling Amanda a con artist now posted long paragraphs about how they always felt something was off about the accusations. The refund requests stopped. Then they reversed, and people started asking how to give again. Amanda watched none of it. She had handed her phone to Yuna at 6:30 that morning, with instructions not to give it back until noon, and had spent the intervening 5.5 hours doing the only thing that reliably kept her from thinking, which was working a busy cafe counter. At 11, the original poster deleted their account. At 11:30, a Korean news outlet ran a piece about a redevelopment project in Yeonnam-dong and the small business owners on the block who had signed under pressure, and named the company, and did not name Sue Ah, but named her director. At noon, Yuna handed the phone back and said, "You won." "I didn't win anything, I just stopped losing." "Is there a difference?" "Ask me on the 30th. Because that was the thing that nobody in the cafe was saying out loud. 2 million people now knew that Haru Cafe was a real place with a real crisis and a real deadline. And it did not matter even slightly, because the crisis was not money anymore and had not been money for 2 days, and there was still no certificate, and now there were 16 hours left. At 2 in the afternoon, Do-hyun called to say he had tried a judicial route and it had failed. At 3, Junho started taking down the string lights. Amanda found him on a stepladder in the middle of a full cafe, quietly unhooking them one section at a time, and she stood at the bottom of the ladder and said, "What are you doing?" They were hers. If the place goes, I'm not leaving them for a demolition crew. It's not 5 o'clock tomorrow yet. Amanda. He looked down at her and his face was not upset. It was calm, which was infinitely worse. Let me do this. Let me be allowed to start. And at 3:30 in the afternoon on day 4, with 16 hours left, the bell above the door of Haru Café rang, and Soo-ah walked in holding a document folder. The cafe went silent for the 3rd time in 6 weeks. She walked to the counter. She did not sit down. Her face was doing something Amanda had never seen it do, which was nothing at all, as if every expression she owned had been switched off to get her through the door. "I watched your video," she said to Amanda. Amanda said nothing. "I made 4 calls yesterday, then I resigned this morning." Soo-ah placed the folder on the counter and slid it across. "That is the certified original registry certificate for the 30% share. It was issued at 9:40 this morning. My company had already pulled the full registry history on all 6 buildings during due diligence, which means we have had a certified copy in a file cabinet in Gangnam since February." Junho stared at the folder. "You had it," he said, "the whole time? You had it in a filing cabinet?" "Yes." "Did you know what it was?" Soo-ah's composure finally completely broke. "No," she said, "not until yesterday. It was one line in a due diligence annex about an encumbrance on the title, and a junior analyst flagged it as unresolved in February, and it was never followed up because nobody thought a cafe owner's dead mother had bought part of a building in 2014. Her voice was shaking now. "But I should have followed it up. It was my project. I had the answer in a folder for 5 months, and I never once looked because I had already decided what kind of man you were and what you'd sign." Nobody in the cafe was breathing. "I did not write that post about you," Soo-ah said to Amanda, "but I made it possible, and I have known that every day since, and I have been telling myself it was business." She pushed the folder the last inch across the counter. "It isn't. It was never business. I came back to this neighborhood in an ivory blazer to prove to a man who used to love me that I had become someone important, and I have spent 6 weeks doing the worst things I have ever done in order to keep believing that." She stepped back from the counter. "File it today, not tomorrow, today." And Soo-ah, who had walked into that cafe 6 weeks earlier like she owned the ground, turned around and walked out of it without waiting to be forgiven. If that redemption arc got you, comment the word Soo-ah right now, because I want to know how many of you saw it coming and how many of you wanted her to burn. Drop that like, hit subscribe because we have 20 minutes left, and this is where it gets hard. The objection was filed at 4:52 in the afternoon, 8 minutes before the registry office closed, by a lawyer who ran the last 100 meters. The sale did not complete. On the morning of the 30th, the owner of the building, a man in his 60s named Beck, who had spent 4 weeks assuming this would be simple, sat at a small wooden table inside Haru Cafe and looked at a document he apparently never read properly in the 11 years he'd owned the place. "She told me it was a loan," he said. "It wasn't a loan," Do-hyun said pleasantly. "Would you like to see where you signed?" Beck sold his 70% that same week because a hostile minority shareholder with 2 million people watching was a considerably worse investment than taking the money and going, and because Do-hyun made it very clear which of those two outcomes would involve lawyers. Haru Cafe was bought outright in full on a Tuesday afternoon. Junho signed the papers with his mother's pen, which he had kept in a drawer for 3 years and had never once used, and when it was done he stood in the middle of his own building for the first time in his life and did not know what to do with his hands. Mrs. O cried. The 2 students cried. Yuna, who had come back on the train that morning, cried so hard she had to go outside. And Amanda stood at the edge of it, filming, because that was what she did, and because holding a camera meant she had something to do with her face. Her flight was in 19 hours. She had not changed it. She had thought about it every single day for 2 weeks, and the truth, which she had not said out loud to anyone, was that she had not changed it because nobody had asked her to. The party went till 1 in the morning. By 2, it was just the 2 of them, in a cafe full of empty glasses and stacked chairs and string lights, exactly where they had been 6 weeks earlier when a soaked woman with $11 sat down at a counter and started talking. "So," Amanda said. "So," Junho said. Neither of them said anything else for nearly a minute. "My flight's at 8, she said finally. I should leave here by 5. "I know. The shoot starts in Lisbon on the 14th, then Morocco, then Vietnam, then— I don't know why I'm listing countries at you." "Because it's easier than the other thing," Junho said. Amanda laughed and it came out broken. "Yeah." He was looking at the counter. He had been looking at the counter for most of an hour. "Junho," her voice was very quiet, "if there is something you want to say to me, this is the last night you will ever be able to say it. I need you to understand that. Not the last night for a while, the last one." And Junho Kang, who had spent 3 years being fine, looked up at her and said absolutely nothing. It was not that there was nothing there. There was so much there that he could feel it pressing against the back of his teeth. It was that every single sentence he tried to assemble ended in a request, and a request was a weight, and he had spent 6 weeks watching this woman carry weight that was not hers until it nearly destroyed her professionally, and he had promised himself in a lawyer's office 4 days earlier that he would never hand her another one. So he said nothing, and he told himself it was a kindness. Amanda waited 11 seconds. She counted them. Then she nodded and picked up her jacket and said, "Okay, good night, Junho," and went upstairs and did not cry until she had closed the door. She did not sleep. She lay on the storage room couch that had been her bedroom for 6 weeks in a building that now belonged to a man who had just watched her walk up the stairs, and she went through every conversation they had ever had, looking for the place where she had misread it. She could not find it. That was the worst part. She went through all of it, the counter and the rain and the floor behind the till at 2 in the morning and his hand under hers on a small wooden table, and none of it had been in her head. At 3, she got up and packed the last of it. At 4, she wrote him a note, read it twice and threw it away because everything in it was a request, and she was not going to be the one who asked either. She left at 5 in the morning. He carried her suitcase down the narrow stairs and out into the alley and lifted it into the taxi, and the 2 of them stood on the pavement in the dark in front of a cafe that was now finally his. "Thank you," Junho said, "for all of it. I know that isn't enough. There isn't a version of thank you that's enough." "I let you in out of the rain," Amanda said. "We're even." "We're not remotely even." She laughed. He almost did. There was a moment then, about 2 seconds long, where both of them stood in a dark alley with their mouths slightly open and the entire rest of their lives balanced on which one of them spoke first. Neither of them did. And then she got into the taxi, and it pulled out of the alley, and Junho Kang stood alone on the pavement outside his mother's cafe at 5 in the morning and watched the only good thing that had happened to him in 3 years drive away from him because he had been unable to open his mouth. He stood there for a long time. Then he went inside, and he started the machines, and he opened at 7 like he had every morning for 3 years. Mrs. O came in at 8. She took one look at his face and said, "Where is she?" "Airport." "Why?" "Because her flight is at 8, Junho said. Mrs. O set down her handbag with enough force to rattle the table. "You did not ask her," she said. "It's not. Do not tell me it is not that simple. It is exactly that simple." Mrs. O's voice rose enough that 2 customers looked up. "That girl gave you 6 weeks of her life. She gave you her reputation. She stood in front of 2 million people and let them call her a thief so that your mother's name would be clean. And you stood in that alley at 5 in the morning and said, 'Thank you.' What was I supposed to say? Ask her to stay." The whole cafe was staring. Junho stood behind the counter with a milk pitcher in his hand and his mother's building around him, and said in a voice that came out much smaller than he intended, "And then what? She turns down 12 episodes and 4 continents, and the thing she has wanted since she was 22, to stand in a cafe in Yeonnam-dong with a man who has nothing? That is not love, Mrs. O. That is a trap with a nice face on it." "Oh, you stupid boy." And then, more gently, "Did it occur to you that she might want to be asked and then say no?" Junho went very still. "You have decided that because you cannot give her everything, you are not allowed to offer her anything. So you have offered her nothing, and now she's on a plane, and she will spend the whole flight believing that 6 weeks meant less to you than it meant to her. That is what you have actually done. Not nobility, that." Junho looked at the clock. It was 8 minutes past 8. "Her flight's already gone," he said. Mrs. O looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her handbag and said, "Then I suppose you had better hope she's the kind of woman who checks her phone." Amanda's flight had not gone. It had been delayed 90 minutes on the tarmac at Incheon, which was the single luckiest thing that had happened to either of them in 6 weeks, and she was sitting in seat 34K with her forehead against the window when her phone buzzed. It was a voice message, 41 seconds long. She almost didn't play it. She played it. "Amanda." A long pause. Background noise, an espresso machine, someone's chair scraping. "I couldn't say it last night. I've been trying to work out why, and I think it's because for 3 years I have believed that everything good is borrowed, and I should hand it back before it gets taken. So I handed you back. At 5 in the morning, on the pavement, I handed you back, and I called it being decent." Another pause, longer. "I love you, that's the thing. I have loved you since about the 2nd week, and I said nothing because I could not work out what I was supposed to offer you in exchange, and I have only just understood that you were never asking for an exchange." A breath. "I'm not asking you to stay. Go and make the thing. Make all 12 of them. I just needed you to know that when you get off that plane in Lisbon, somebody in Seoul is going to be thinking about you at every single closing time, and that you were not the only one, and that I was not fine. I was never fine. I was just quiet." The message ended. Amanda Johnson sat in seat 34K on a delayed flight at Incheon International Airport and cried so hard that the man beside her offered her a napkin. She played it again, then a third time with her hand pressed over her mouth. The cabin crew came through checking seatbelts. Outside the window, the tarmac was gray and wet, and the ground crew were finishing with the last of the baggage carts. And somewhere back across that city, a man was standing behind a counter at the start of an ordinary Thursday, having just said the largest thing he had ever said into a phone and put it in his apron pocket. Amanda thought about getting off the plane. She thought about it seriously, in the way you think about a thing you already know you are not going to do, testing it to see how it feels. She could stand up, she could make a scene, she could be back in Yeonnam-dong in 90 minutes, and she would arrive with nothing. That was the part Deja had been right about in August, and the part Amanda had spent 4 months refusing to look at directly. She had built a whole life inside somebody else's emergency, and the emergency was over now, and if she got off this plane, she would be walking back into that cafe as a woman with no work, no plan, and no reason to be there except a man, and one day that would curdle, and she would be exactly what Soo-ah had warned her she would become. She was not going to do that to him, and she was not going to do it to herself. So she wiped her face and she took out her laptop, and with 11 minutes left before they closed the cabin doors, she sent an email to a production company. The subject line was Contract, Season 2, One Condition. If you are absolutely wrecked right now, comment the word 34K because I need to know how many of you are crying with her. Drop a like, subscribe if you have somehow made it this far without doing it, because we have one scene left, and it is the one you have been waiting 3 episodes for. 4 months later, Haru Cafe closed for renovations for 9 days in November. It reopened with 40% more floor space because the wall between the cafe and the empty storage unit next door had come down, which was possible now that both belonged to the same person. There were 14 new tables. There was a wall by the door with 211,000 names printed in it, in type so small you needed to stand very close. And people did stand very close, every single day, looking for the one they had contributed. There was a second location opening in March, and there was a photograph of a Korean woman in her 50s laughing outside a shopfront in 2009, hanging where everyone could see it. Junho had not been alone since August. Yuna had transferred her final year to a university across the city and moved into the flat above. Mrs. O had appointed herself unofficial general manager and had strong opinions about the new chairs. The 2 students had become 4. He was still, by any reasonable measure, a quiet man, but he had stopped being a quiet man in an empty room, which turned out to be a completely different condition. The 4 months in between had not been nothing. They had spoken almost every day at hours that made no sense in either direction, because Lisbon was 8 hours behind Seoul and Hanoi was 2 ahead, and Amanda had given up on arithmetic somewhere over the Atlantic and simply called whenever she surfaced. Junho took the calls in the back room between orders and at closing time, and once at 4 in the morning standing in an alley in his coat because she had found a bakery in Marrakesh that made something she needed him to see. They had not put a word on it. Neither of them had raised the voice message. It sat underneath every conversation like a floor. In October, when the series came out, Junho closed the cafe 2 hours early and watched all 12 episodes over 4 nights with Yuna and Mrs. O and the 4 students crammed into the room, and Mrs. O cried at the one about the market in Oaxaca and then denied it aggressively. In November, Amanda sent a photograph from an airport lounge in Bangkok of a laptop screen showing a contract with 1 clause highlighted in yellow and no caption. Junho stared at it for 6 minutes before he understood what he was looking at. Then he called Yuna, and then he called Mrs. O, and then he went and stood in his own storeroom for a while alone, with his hands over his face. On the 11th of December at 4 in the afternoon, the cafe was closed for a private event, which was unusual, and the windows had been papered over, which was extremely unusual, and Mrs. O had been guarding the door for 2 hours with the intensity of a woman defending a national border. Inside, Junho Kang was rearranging the same 6 chairs for the 9th time. "Oppa," Yuna caught his wrist. "Stop! They're fine. They have been fine for an hour. What if the flight's late? Then she'll be late. What if she says no?" Yuna looked at her brother, this man who went to his mother's funeral and then opened the shop the next morning, and she said, "Then you will have asked, which is more than you did in August, and you nearly lost her over it." At 12 minutes past 4, there was a knock on the papered-over door. Amanda Johnson had spent 4 months in 9 countries. The series came out in October and did extraordinarily well, and the second season was commissioned within a fortnight, and she had negotiated exactly one thing into that second contract, which she had not told anyone about except Deja, who had screamed for a full minute. The negotiated clause was this: seasons 2 and 3 would be based out of Seoul. She had flown in that morning to tell him. She stepped through the door into a cafe she barely recognized and stopped dead. The lights were off. The string lights were on. Every table had a single dried flower in a glass jar, exactly as they always had. And at the counter where she had sat soaking wet, with $11 and no plan on her worst night of her life, there was 1 stool and 1 steaming mug of ginger tea, and a man in a black apron standing behind it, looking like he might actually be sick.
"You did this?" Amanda said. "Yuna did most of it. I did the tea." Junho's voice was not steady. "I have practiced this 11 times and have forgotten all of it." "Junho, please let me do it badly." He came around the counter. "If I stop, I won't start again." She stopped talking. "6 weeks ago, you were a stranger under an awning," Junho said. "I opened the door because my mother used to say, 'A closed door in the rain is the loneliest sound in the world,' and I did not know that I was the one being let in. I have spent 3 years thinking that keeping this place open was the way to keep her. It wasn't. You were the first thing I chose since she died, and I chose it too late and too quietly, and I have promised myself I will never do that again." He reached into his apron pocket. "I know you have 4 continents. I know you have a season 3. I am not asking you to stop, and I am not asking you to make me the reason for anything." His hands were shaking badly. "I am asking whether in between all of it you would come home here, to this, to me." He opened the box. Inside, on the cushion, was a thin gold ring that was clearly not new, the band worn slightly flat on one side from years of being worn by somebody who worked with her hands. Amanda's breath stopped. "She sold it in 2014, Junho said quietly, to buy 30% of a building. She told me it was at the jeweler's. Bake's wife kept it in a drawer for 11 years and gave it back to me in October when she found out what her husband had signed." He looked up. "It is the ring that saved the cafe, and it is the only thing I own that she chose, and I would like you to have it, if you want it." Amanda Johnson, who had built an entire career out of always having something to say, could not produce a single word. So she nodded. And then she said yes out loud 4 times, and then she was crying, and then he was, and somewhere outside the papered-over window, Mrs. O could distinctly be heard shouting, "Well, well," at a door she had been forbidden to open. They let her in. She screamed. Yuna screamed. The 4 students who had been hiding in the back room for 90 minutes under strict instructions came out screaming.
And at some point in the middle of all of it, Amanda looked over Junho's shoulder at a photograph on the wall of a woman in her 50s laughing outside a shopfront in 2009 and thought with absolute clarity, "Thank you." They were married the following September in the cafe, with the tables pushed back and 140 people crammed into a space rated for 60, which Mrs. O had personally approved on the grounds that fire regulations were a matter of opinion. Sue Ah was not invited, which Amanda had thought about for a long time and had decided was correct. But in the spring, when the second location opened in Seongsudong, an envelope arrived with no return address, containing a photograph of Junho's mother that nobody in the family had ever seen, taken in 2011, of a woman in an apron laughing at something outside the frame. There was no note. Junho hung it behind the counter of the new place and never said a word about who sent it, and Amanda never asked. And on a Tuesday night in Yeonnam-dong, in a small cafe with exposed brick and string lights and dried flowers in glass jars, a woman who had once been stranded with $11 locked the front door, flipped the wooden sign to closed, and turned around to find her husband already holding 2 mugs. "It's not coffee. Coffee will make you more anxious right now. You've been waiting 3 years to use that line again. 2 years, 10 months, but yes." Outside, it started to rain. That is the end of Seoul Café Love, and if you made it all the way here, thank you honestly. Comment your favorite moment from the whole series because I read every single one. Drop a like if this ending gave you what you wanted, and subscribe because the next series starts in 7 days and it is even bigger than this one. I will see you there.